Our lockdown video this morning comes from a place in Tralee that was part of the Strand Road area of Tralee, but it was very posh. A posh part of Strand Road, they called it. It's, of course, it's Basin Road. Basin Road is, on one side, hasn't changed at all. On the other side has changed much in the intervening 50 years. The Brandon Court building now stands where Jerry O'Sullivan, the building contractor, had his yard and workshops. Jerry O'Sullivan, of course, was involved in building many of the buildings in Tralee. Did a lot of repairs to the old churches and schools in the town. Paddy Mahoney from Marion Park worked here as his office clerk in the 50s, 60s and 70s. I came here to this part of town looking for love. There was a great pool of talent here. There were more nice girls here in this part of town per house than any other part of Tralee. Although at the time I didn't know their standards were high. I realised fairly quickly I didn't stand much of a chance here. I had no prospects and no ambition. Our story this morning starts at the corner of Chapel Street, where you enter Basin View from High Street. And of course we're outside the premises that was Nellie Burke's shop in the 60s, a little sweet shop. And across the road, of course, you had Carmody's, Mrs. Carmody, a lovely woman. There was also a shop there, overgrown now with ivy, showing its years, and the vacant lot where Collins's, the building contractors, had their premises. Of course, families, we remember here, of course, this corner is now taken up by the Huddle Bar. The McNeice family lived here. Of course, they're still in town in Brendan's Park in Tralee. The family of Mrs. McNeice. And of course, Joan Boyd, a well-known character around the town, a great strong personality, and her family are still in Tralee, of course. Joan was a force of nature. She lived here, across the road from Carmody's shop. And of course, I suppose this corner will be taken away eventually when everybody is gone, and the road will be widened to facilitate the heavy traffic on the route to Dingle. Of course, this is all changed now. The property that was Kelleher's Mill, all that remains is a stone wall at the far end of the street. And of course, across from Kelleher's Mill, Eugene O'Brien had his garage. Eugene came from Listellick. And of course, latterly he was joined by his brother Ned, and they opened the premises now, which is now belong to the St. Vincent de Paul at the other end of the street, and worked their garage there till they both retired. Of course, the Lawlers still live in the street, Deirdre Nain, and of course the Power family lived here until recently, till James passed away, and there was Marion, Patricia, and of course the oldest sister, Irene. And you had Mullinses, of course, were next door, Mrs. Mullins. Mrs. Lawler, of course, had the concession of the shop in the Ash Memorial Picture House, the Ash. And everybody in Tralee knew her. They wouldn't have known her name maybe, but certainly we all knew her. That's where we bought the little pennies worth of sucky sweets going into the pictures. Clifford's Cash and Carry, of course. Clifford's came later in the mid-60s, and of course they run their wholesale business from here. Tom Clifford, well known. Now his son Peter runs the business from here. Of course, the street that's known locally as Basin View is not in actual fact Basin View at all. It's Basin Road, and it has two blocks of houses. One, Hoffman's Terrace, on the left hand side as you head towards Dingle, named after one of the prominent families of the 1800s that lived in Tralee. And of course Across the street you have Basin Road. I'm out a little bit later this morning as I normally would be, and of course we have Joe Corrigan. Joe is well known locally. Joe comes from a very prominent family, and of course again a house full of girls. Kay McKenna, Mary McKenna and Elizabeth. Elizabeth lives in Dublin now, and very fashionable liberties. Kay and Mary, of course, married 2 policemen, and Dennis, the youngest of the family, still lives here in the family home, one of the few homes still occupied by the original families. Kay and Mary both married policemen, went on to become the police commissioners, one of the south part of Ireland and one of the northern part of Ireland. I met you, sweetie, out for a walk early this morning. Matthew, of course, is a great contributor to the local community here, in that he spends a lot of time working in the area, cleaning it up and so forth. Matthew comes from a well-known Tralee family from Rahilly's village. Matthew's father, of course, worked for Gerard Hogan, the undertaker in Tralee, for many years. And of course, Michael, the brother of the McKennas. And of course, Mrs. McKenna was a lovely woman. She'd operate from her kitchen here, making scones and apple tarts for all the down and outs in Tralee. There was a constant flow of people coming to the door here. It's a busy morning on the street this morning. Of course, I'm running later than normal. John Griffin of Kerry County Council, of course, John very involved in the Jenny Johnston project in Tralee. Just getting back to Michael McKenna. Michael McKenna, when I ever meet him, he's a thin kind of fella like myself, and I remember in the 50s when we'd get the comics, the Dell comics, and there used to be ads in the comics where you'd see a skinny fella lying down on the beach, and of course the muscular fella kicking sand in his face. And there were advertisements for power workers and Charles Atlas magazines that you could put on muscle and teaching you how to defend yourself. Well, of course, needless to say, now all the fellas that had muscle have turned to fat, have blood pressure and heart trouble. The skinny fellas, myself and Michael McKenna, we're still going strong, thanks be to God. The wheel goes around, Michael. The end house in Basin Road, of course, was the home of David Quinlan. David was a great swimmer. He used to do the canal swims during the festival in Tralee. It was every second turn. The Fitzgibbons would win one time and David would win another. Died very young as well. And of course, as we move down the street, we have the Reedy household, of course. Another fine crop of nice looking girls. There's 3 Reedy sisters, and Kay, Eileen and Mary, in no particular order. And of course Dennis, the brother Dennis, of course. And Mrs. Reedy was a lovely woman. Of course, when I think of the Reedys, I think of miniskirts. Of course, Mary Quant developed the miniskirts, and of course that time they were very popular. And the girls, Mary often recounts the stories that when she would be going dancing, she'd put on the miniskirt, but she couldn't get by her mother at the door, who would say, "For God's sake, go upstairs and take that thing off you. You're not going out in that." And she would, of course, hide the miniskirt under her jumper, and she'd go to the Powers up the road where she would change before going dancing. Dennis, the brother, is still local. He's married in Carsley in Tralee. Of course, 800 years we spent trying to get rid of the English, and the 3 girls go off and they bring 3 English fellas back from England to marry. A fellow by the name of Robin Brown, Chris Keevy, and a fellow by the name of Stephen Fry. But lovely guys at the same time. Fitted in well here in this street. And of course Mrs. Reedy used to have a Mini, and she was seen regularly up and down the street in her Mini. Not the Mary Quant Mini, but the Mini Minor. the little car. Her husband was a retired policeman who served in Banteer in County Cork. And of course, directly across the road from the Reedies was Bertie Crawford. Bertie was the caretaker in the Kerry Protestant Hall in Ash Street. And of course, Bertie had a parrot. Can you imagine? That time in the 50s, no television. We all visited as children. We visited Bertie's house to see the parrot. A parrot speaking in a Kerry accent. Can you imagine? Of course, the Graney family came from here too. There was Catherine, John, Andrew, who are still here, meet fairly regularly. They're not well though, the two boys. They follow Man United football team, Manchester United. John and Andrew. They're missing the old football games now at the moment. They're not feeling too good. There's Catherine, Sheila and Michael and Marion. And of course, another fella that came down from Oak Park like myself, came down to this street under pretext of playing football, came down playing soccer. Of course, we knew what he was playing at. He took Catherine across the big river up to Oak Park, where they still both live. And of course the Sullivans lived here, Mrs. and Mr. O'Sullivan. She had a vegetable shop up the town and a florist. And of course the family are well represented in the town of Tralee still. Her husband there has a pub and delicatessen in the centre of town, as do her grandsons have taken over the iconic Benner's Hotel in the centre of town. Another man out walking his dog now this morning, one of the Buzzer Kearnses, Brendan. The great handball family. My friend Frank Hennessy, of whom I often speak, when he was the factory, CWS factory in Rock Street closed down, Frank got severance pay of £700 a cheque. And of course that time the normal working guys didn't have bank accounts or anything and he couldn't cash the cheque. It was Storeen Sullivan here. Storeen was a buyer for the factories he changed a cheque of £700 for him and gave him cash. The O'Sullivans were very involved in the Festival of Kerry in the initial stages, in the formative years of the festival. Both Storeen and Mrs. O'Sullivan. And of course down the street the state solicitor, Donald Brown, lived. And of course, speaking of the Reedy family, Veronica also married a policeman, as did Anne O'Sullivan down here. The policemen seemed to be favoured in this street. Of course, I was neither. I had no prospects. The Veronica has the honour of being the first recipient of a lung in this country. The operation was the first of its kind in this country, done in the Mater Hospital, and she's, as we speak, she's celebrating 15 years a recipient since the operation was done. And we're filming in the second week in May, and we wish her well, and we're thinking of her as we're walking this street. Mr. Scannell, who owned the Central Tea Stores in the middle of town opposite the Bank of Ireland, lived here. His daughter Hilary is still in Tralee, hale and hearty, another one of the girls from this street. We're standing outside on the footpath, on the sidewalk, outside what was the premises of Fitzgerald Brothers, the building contractors. Of course, the Fitzgeralds were very involved in the whole 1916-1920 thing in Tralee. And of course their building here, which was called the Rink, was very much part of the 1916 rising. And of course when we passed here as kids, you could hear the whirring of the saws and planers going inside here. And of course that time everything was, the automation was very limited. Most of the things were hand done. And as we look across the road, we have the home of Peggy and Dinny Mack, as they were fondly known. Francie Conway, their son, can be seen on Facebook every day singing his way through the COVID lockdown. Francie, of course, sang and played with the Fury Brothers in Dublin and all the big bands. Spent a lot of time on the continent playing. Francie is always welcomed back in Tralee when he returns. He's very involved in the Christy Hennessy Festival here in Tralee in the fall of each year. Very dominant in the street, of course, are the Georgian set of Georgian Thai style houses with, and of course here the McElligott family were strong here, and they're still in Tralee, the Undertakers in Boherby. And of course Joe McElligott married to Helen O'Shea, Clash. Benny, of course, and still in Tralee. Their mother her name was Reedy. Reedy's Terrace in Rock Street, of course, belonged to the Reedy family, her family. The McElligotts, of course, part of the memory of this Basin view, Basin Road. As we look back up the road, this quiet road, although I've met more people this morning than I would normally meet. Of course, Oliver Brown, a well-known name in the boxing community in Tralee, Irish champion, and he had his clinic here. He was a physiotherapist. Took care of a lot of the sports people down through the years in the 60s, 70s and 80s. We're now in the low field in Tralee, and it got its name by virtue of the fact that it's below road level. You can see how much below road level it is as we look out towards the mountains, which are shrouded in cloud this very morning. And this, of course, is the field of many a great football game. A few brave men in this part of town brought soccer, which was seen as an English game, to the town in 1960s, in the early 60s. The Dynamos Football Club was founded in 1961, and they played their games here on this field. And the nearest football team at the time was in Limerick, and of course fellas like Frank Hennessy, Gerald Fitzgibbon, Clobber as he was known. Timmy Coonahan, of course, who lives up the road from here, is still very much involved in maintaining this ground as a memorial, if you like, to the Tralee's soccer past and to the great heroes that played here. And of course, when the club was first started, soccer was seen as an English game. Many of us only knew one name, Stanley Matthews. Of course, every fella that played here his ambitions was to be a Stanley Matthews. And of course, the original fellas who put the club together and brought the soccer here was the subject of abuse. In actual fact, they got abuse from the football players and this was a strong community of Gaelic football players. And not only did they get the abuse from here, they got it from the church as well, for bringing the English game to Tralee. And as we look around the field here, we remember some of the names that played for the Dynamos at the time. Paul McCarthy, Gerard Clobber Fitzgibbon, Frank Hennessy, John Landers, John Barrett, Seamus Dowling, Jerome Hennessy, brother of Frank's, Tommy Conroy, Dennis Foley, Bernie Nommock, Jim Slug Bailey, one of the founder members of the club. And of course, if you look online at Bernard Pop Lynch, whose father played here in this field, has a great photograph of the Dynamos football team of the 1960s. And here we leave the Field of Dreams with the memories of those days. And as I look back up the street, I remember the reasons that brought me in, brought many others, including my neighbour above in Oak Park in Killeen, George Deneen. We came looking for love. And did we find it? That is the question. Of course, I already told you about George Deneen, but I did as well. I met a girl who was going out with a fellow who went away on holidays for 2 weeks. And we have a saying in Ireland that if you pull something over on someone, it's called wiping their eye. Well, while he was on holidays, I wiped his eye. I slipped in behind his back and started going out with her. We were both 16 at the time. We're still together 60 years later. Well, 55. What's a few years between friends? She told me not to mention her name on live television, but I have to tell you she has the same name. Her name is Irene, but she has the same surname as a great Irish whiskey. And just as potent, I can tell you. At times. Of course, before I leave this street, I'm here and one of the locals, John Graney. John, of course, is looking in over the field wall here into the low field where there were great football games between the builders and the merchants and local leagues, great teams of the 60s. John, of course, a Manchester United fan. John, of course, this morning is not thinking of Man United. He's suffering withdrawal symptoms because there's no soccer on television at the moment, but he's thinking of the great people that played here on this pitch and the fellas that inspired the soccer teams here. Of course, Stanley Matthews. John is too young to remember Stanley Matthews, but he does remember the great football games here, the memories you can't wipe out. That's where we leave our lockdown video for today.